Today's guest is Evan Jaqua, founder of the Solutions Party. Evan believes we are at a pivotal moment in history where the very future of democracy, freedom, and prosperity is at stake. Drawing from a life of extraordinary breadth, Evan has worked across technology, aviation, and international business, and he understands firsthand the challenges of everyday Americans as both a single parent and an entrepreneur. Fluent in English, Japanese, Spanish, and Chinese, he has lived in America, Japan, South America, and China, giving him a rare global perspective on what people everywhere truly want: freedom, prosperity, and a brighter future for their children. Through the Solutions Party at solutionsparty.org, Evan is calling for urgent reforms, ending the addiction to power in politics, making elections about ideas instead of partisanship, restoring trustworthy journalism, and building an economy rooted in innovation and opportunity. His vision is bold, his experience is deep, and his message is clear. Real change begins with all of us. Hey, how's it going, Evan?
Well, it's just wonderful to be here. I'm actually talking to you from South America right now, Donald.
Oh, okay.
And, do you prefer Donald or Don?
Either one's fine. I'm good with either.
Okay, some people are a little touchy about that. Like some people, they Michael, they don't like to be called Mike, or David, they don't like to be called Dave. So I always like to clear that up. But thank you for getting my last name correctly pronounced. Very few people actually get it right. So thank you.
Hey, no problem. So, I came across your profile and, man, I just couldn't help myself. I know normally we don't do politics here, but you're really not about, you're about what politics should be about, to be honest. And that's open discussion and being open to change and trying to make, improve your foxhole every day. And, that's what we always said in the Army. And I think we forgot about that. And I was going through your website and you just got some really good ideas, and I got some questions about a few of the others. Why don't we start with a little bit of background about yourself, okay, and how did this website come about?
Well, as you mentioned in the intro, I've had the wonderful opportunity of living most of my life actually overseas. I actually got my master's degree in computer science in Japan, in a Japanese university, and getting my degree, actually writing my thesis even in Japanese, and then living in China not too long after Tiananmen Square, and then having the opportunity to be here in South America, where you see all sorts of problems that people have, and a lot of the ideas that are on the Solutions Party, or I'd like to take all the credit for them, but I really can't, because this is the result of conversations with people around the world and seeing, getting different ideas. And so I basically have taken what I think are the best ideas and kind of summarize them. But as you mentioned in the intro, really we need to take a step back and realize that we all want the same thing. We all want freedom. Yep. We all want prosperity. We all want our kids to have the opportunity to achieve their potential. And all of those things are possible. What we need to do, though, is we need to get the emotion manipulations, the emotions, the lies, the misinformation out of our politics, and make our politics what it should be: a competition, a healthy competition of ideas. Let's express our ideas clearly and honestly. Let's listen to their ideas. Let's not purposely, misrepresent them. Let's decide which ideas we like the best, vote on them, and move forward. It's really that simple. So that's basically the idea, the fundamental idea. But probably the biggest thing, though, that I want to emphasize is that, the human brain, it's a wonderful thing, but one of the greatest weaknesses of the human brain is ease with which it develops addictions. We develop addictions, to substances, whether alcohol, drugs, or even junk food, behavioral addictions, whether it be gambling or social media or pornography, and even emotional addictions. People can get addicted to anger and hate and greed. And but probably the most addictive thing of all is power. And once people get power, they don't want to give it up. And, I like to say, well, Vladimir Putin would probably be a nice guy if he were painting houses outside of Moscow, or Kim Jong-un would probably be a pretty nice guy if he were running an Airbnb in Hawaii and surfing every day. And, the Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela would probably be a pretty nice guy if he were still driving a bus. But what turns these people into vicious, mass murdering monsters? It's their addiction to power. Once they get it, they don't want to give up. And the same problem plagues our politicians, which is why they put their political careers above everything else. That's why they put their partisan interests above everything else. And if I were a doctor, Donald, and I had to prescribe to you a highly addictive medication, what would I do to help ensure that you don't get addicted to it? Well, I would give you small portions spread apart. And that's exactly how political power has to be allocated. Small portions spread apart so that you get into office, you have one chance. I say one-term limit. You have one chance to make your difference. And what are you going to do with it? Are you going to blow it, or are you going to do your best? And there's no re-election here. You can't even run for another office while you're serving. 100% of your time dedicated to working for your constituents. And then you move on. And so that's the basic idea. Now, I know that politics is not necessarily something that you like to emphasize on your podcast. So we can talk about this in more detail, a lot of detail, and we can talk about some of the other subjects. But if I had to make one wish to change our politics, we need a whole series of reforms. I believe we have complex problems. They need to they're interchanged, or pardon me, they're intertwined. But if I had to make one wish, it would be, okay, let's get rid of re-election. Let's make it impossible for our politicians to get addicted to power, because I think that's the most fundamental thing that we have to work. And this, again, are ideas that people around the world have shared with me. Really, it all comes down to our politicians, whether we're talking Peru, whether we're talking Japan, whether we're talking China, or the U.S.
I think you said a lot of good stuff, and I want to kind of integrate. A lot of reason why people don't like talking politics is because it's the 10% on each side that are being heard. They're the loudest.
Right.
I believe the other 80% agree with you in a lot of different ways. They just aren't screaming it from the top of their buildings like the other crazy 10% on both sides.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things I really am happy about is that I have friends across the political spectrum. I have some ultra MAGA friends. I've got friends who consider themselves socialists. And, one of the things that I do want to give a little bit of history on is, very briefly, is when I went to college. I went to a small liberal arts college, and it was liberal in every sense of the word. Now, I was a young Republican. I had just gotten through voting for Proposition 13 California. I was staunchly anti-Soviet, staunchly capitalist. And I can tell you, I got into a lot of emotionally charged discussions with my federal students. But after all the heated arguing, after all the intense debating, after all the points and counterpoints have been made, we could go and eat dinner together. We could go get lunch together. We could go get coffee together, go study together, laugh together. Because even though we had very different points of view, we all knew we all had the best interests of everybody at heart, the country at heart. And it was that exchange of ideas that made us all better. I learned from them. They learned from me. And so if you get, the out of control emotions and you focus on, people's ideas, and there are ideas, good ideas across the political spectrum. Some ideas are better than others given different circumstances, but let's hear what the ideas, let's express them honestly, our own ideas honestly, let's listen to them, the other ideas with open mind, and let's decide which, and then base those on facts, not lies and misrepresentation. And this is how democracy should work. A competition of ideas, not a war between tribes.
Yeah. Going through your website, there's a couple things on here that I have thought the same thing too. I have yet to understand why does it take $300 and some million to run for an office, you know?
Right. Right.
There should be a more effective way that opens it up to hear. You know, there may be a homeless person out there that's got the best ideas in the world, but they can't afford to run for office. You know,
I totally agree. You know, our elected, like, for example, our Congress should be much more of a cross section of our society as a whole. We should have the teacher from North Carolina, the small business owner from Washington State, the truck driver from Florida, you know, the doctor from New Mexico, having a variety of different points of view. And so, one of the things that I believe is that what would be kind of interesting, and I haven't actually put this on the website, is let's say we have 438 seats open for Congress. Well, maybe we have a rotating 10% that are randomly selected from people who've applied and who've shown some basic qualifications. You know, you take tests, you show that you've got some knowledge of, you know, how government works. You put your name into the pool, and we have just a random 10% for different districts. You know, it wouldn't be the same district every time, but so that would open it up to a kind of ensuring that we get, helping to ensure that we get more diversity of thought, of experience there, because we don't want to have a rich lawyers club. We want to have a Congress that is a much better cross section of our society as a whole. People who've been homeless, people who've had business success, people who, you know, struggled in one way or another. And so I totally agree with that. And that's one thing that I want to actually add onto my website, an idea. And these are just ideas. You know, this is what I want to emphasize. I'm all ears. You know, if you don't, you know, some people can tell me why a certain idea is not going to work. Great. I'll learn from that. Let's learn from it, make them better.
Right.
But I totally agree. It shouldn't be, you know, where somebody has to sell themselves to some special interest to get the money. And then once they're in the office, they actually work for the special interest.
Yeah.
And, you know, we got to get rid of that model and have our elected officials working for the general interest, not for the special interest.
Yeah. A lot of people, I think, forget that the Constitution wasn't wrote in one day. There was lots of meetings that happened and discussions of how it should be done, and call it, I guess in today's world, it'd be considered a think tank, you know, where they all came together multiple times and they all argued their points of what was going to be added in there, what needs to be, and so forth. And it seems like that's kind of similar to what you're doing here is you're throwing these ideas out that are not necessarily finished products, but they're the foundation of a new system. And
yes,
I think, you know, some of the stuff I don't see how it would come into play. Like I was reading the one about the terms ending re-elections, right? I think the first part of that would have to be to downsize our government, right? And the reason why I say that is I think they work too many issues that is really not their issue, and it eats up time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, I would just say this. The way to really get this started is not to pass a lot of laws. The way to get this started is to vote for people who promise to only serve one term and not to seek another office while they're currently serving. You vote for people who are going to dedicate themselves 100%. Now, they might have different ideas. You know, that's great. They might have different ideas than what's on the website. That's perfect. But the first thing is to really make this work is not to try to change the Constitution, putting in amendments, prohibiting re-election. The first step is simply let's vote for people who aren't interested in a political career, people who've got ideas, want to go in there, have their one chance to help make a difference, and then move on. No time like what they do now. Right now, they spend at least half their time just in campaign mode, you know, raising funds for their next election, participating in partisan politics. Now, you know, Donald, if you hired me for a 4-year contract to do some work, and I spent half the time on the job every day just lobbying you and your partners for extension on my contract, I doubt you'd be very happy about that.
Yeah.
And why should we be happy with them spending so much time on things? We're not paying them for that. We're paying them to help move our country forward and to make our lives better, make our housing affordable again, making education something that people can do without incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt. These sorts of things that really matter. Cleaning up our environment so we're not ingesting so much plastic every day, for example, or every week.
Yeah.
These things, but at least I haven't heard many ideas like how are we going to make our journalism great again? Because this is one thing that I think is so crucial, because if you think that the pen is mightier than the sword, which I happen to do, then our journalism should be at least as important as our national defense, because our journalism protects us from enemies from both within and without, our national defense from enemies from without. But unless we as a country have a common set of facts, unless we all basically agree on what the truth is, our democracy is going to be paralyzed, because the politicians will take advantage to control the narrative. Just like if you have weak policing, journalism is the politics, what policing is the social order. If you have weak policing, criminals will take advantage to behave with reckless abandon and impunity. If you have weak journalism, politicians will take advantage to lie with reckless abandon and control the narrative. There's nothing more than a politician who's addicted to power wants than to control the narrative.
Yeah.
And so that's why our journalism, I don't hear any ideas from our politicians. How are we going to address this? And I tried to present some ideas to address it, but let's hear some other ideas, and let's make our journalism great again so that people can have faith in it. And it's not, some politician, they get a story they don't like and they just say, well, that's fake news. That is exactly how dictators work. Dictators, they say, well, whatever bad story you hear about me, that's just fake news. I don't send people to prison camps. That's just fake news, even though we know they do.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that aspect of it. There is no trust left in our news industry, and it's no secret, whether people realize it or not. What you get in information from a simple Google search is controlled, right?
Right.
The person that's paying the most is going to get his article
top,
or his top, search. And at the end of the day, the rest get buried, and we know nobody goes past the first 4 items on a search. So our information is controlled, and like you said, information is powerful. And I think our founding fathers knew what the most powerful thing in the world was information. And that's why freedom of speech is the First Amendment. If they thought weapons was more important than speech or knowledge, then they would have made the Second Amendment the First Amendment,
Right.
But it's not. They know that an educated person with power and information is more dangerous than any weapon in the world. And it absolutely is. And so, let me ask you this. Do
Sure.
you see the future government, right? If you could have a system put in place where everybody came together and we started slowly restructuring this, not changing amendments, not changing Constitution, but implementing policies and things that does put the power back into the people's hands. Do you see that being a larger government or a smaller government?
Well, I think we must always remember that government, we have to think of it like my philosophy when it comes to medicine is that you use it as a last resort and very sparingly. Mm-hmm. You don't just go to the medicine jar for every little thing. And the same thing with government. Government has to be only used when other things are better. For example, if you look at history, government-controlled economies perform far worse than free market-based economies. Now, that doesn't mean we need regulation, so we have everybody playing according to the same rules. You can't have just anarchy in the marketplace. If somebody makes a food product, you want to have confidence that product was made in a way that it's not going to poison you, and things like that. You have some regulation, but you always want to keep government as far out of the picture as possible. Now, there are some things that government can do that the marketplace can't. We're talking about, for example, infrastructure. We can't. You're not going to get Apple building the interstate, highway system. So the big, really big society-wide projects in investments, government needs to take the lead on that, but they can do that in coordination with the private industry. But we want to keep government only doing what the private industry and individuals cannot do for themselves. And
right.
So I having lived in China, for example, where the government controls everything, boy, I can tell you, I sure as hell don't want us going down that route. And, we want the government to really serve the people and to, help, invest in infrastructure and in people. When the government invests in people, and what I mean by that is, education. Education now is a very high risk, potentially low return investment. People are graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, just like my own daughters, and it's not like they got 6-figure jobs waiting for them right out of college. Right. I think we want to turn that on the head, but not just for college, for any, if somebody wants to go to a trade school or, learn how to drive a truck or whatever, that these can be modest personal investments with potential high returns. We want to have a well-educated, a well-adapted, when I say educated, I mean well-prepared, adaptable workforce, because a free market economy needs a creative and adaptive workforce, because the market is always changing. If you want the government to guarantee you a job, then you want socialism. And change in the marketplace is great. We all have to kind of buy into change, but the key is that the government helps, makes it easy for you to invest in yourself and change your skill set according to the way the market changes. We need a creative and adaptive workforce. And then I have some ideas on energy, because, if you have unlimited energy at your disposal, unlimited energy plus creativity, plus an adaptive workforce, plus a government that stays out of the way except for infrastructure, is, I believe, a real formula for widespread prosperity. We want an opportunity-rich economy, and that comes about by having a flexible and creative workforce.
Yeah, I think you're 100%. It sounds like you're saying a smaller government that is more effective in the focus of America, right?
Yes, yeah, and getting away from also the whole notion. One of the things that I've come to see is the commonality when it comes to bureaucracies. We want to get away from lifetime government employment. Government employment, I think, if you've never known anybody who's a lifetime government employee, now I know a lot of good people work in government, but unfortunately, whether you're talking about Japan, whether you're talking about China, whether you're talking about Peru, whether you're talking about the U.S., bureaucratic mentality takes hold, and bureaucratic mentality people tend to work to the lowest common denominator everywhere I've seen. And they also develop very poor work habits. Work habits that are more emphasizing create complexity, justify existence instead of simplify and solve. Well, the way to do that, like you help get rid of that, is let's get rid of the whole notion of lifetime government employment where possible. 5 years, after you graduate from college, if you can't find a job in the private industry, you can get a 5-year job with the government, where, by the way, we will give you incentives to find ways to make government more efficient. Instead of looking for ways to spend money, if you find a way to save $1 million, you're going to get a nice commission for that. So get these young creative minds who don't have a long-term vested interest in government employment, having them find ways to make government more efficient. They get rewarded for it, and then they move on. We give them a one-time severance pay, no lifetime pensions, anything like that.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and so that's one way we want to reform government and keep government under control, so that you don't have these bureaucrats. Which, by the way, I deal with bureaucrats all the time in my work in aviation, and boy, there's nothing worse than having a bureaucrat with a chip on their shoulder. They just abuse their power, and there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. You can complain. I've complained. I've sent letters, and they just don't. Nothing happens. And so let's get rid of the whole notion of lifetime government employment. Let's make government employment temporary. Let's encourage these young minds to come up with ways to make government more efficient, and then move on. And they'll have work experience, they'll have some savings, and then they can move on to the private industry.
Right. Yeah. I agree 100%. There's a lot of things that the government does right now that I don't like, right? I don't like the fact that we send billions, hundreds of billions of dollars overseas for foreign aid, but still have children starving in America, still have homeless people on the streets. We're not taking care of our own as well.
It's a disgrace, actually. In fact, one of the things that's very shocking, and I'm very sorry to say this, but like I get on the public transportation, say in Portland or in LA or wherever, it feels like you're on an asylum on wheels. I mean, at least 40% of the people have got either some substance abuse issue, some mental health issue, or some combination of the two. And I don't see that anywhere else. I don't see that in Japan. I don't see it in South America. I was in, my older daughter lives in Europe. I don't see that in Europe. I don't see it anywhere. And you see things like that, you think, man, there are some real serious things wrong with our country when we have so many people, in those sorts of conditions. And it all really comes down to, the fundamental problem, though, for me anyway, is our politicians. Because our politicians are the one in whom we entrust the sacred power of the people. They're the ones who are supposed to solve these problems. But what is their first priority? Their first priority is staying in office. Yeah. Have you ever heard, such and such representative or such senator is not up for re-election so they can vote their conscience? And you're thinking, why aren't they voting their conscience all the time? Why is it they only vote their conscience when they're not up for re-election? It's insanity.
It is.
And so, I totally agree. We've got to, we can make things so much better if you get our politicians, first of all, working to solve these problems, working to solve our journalism problem, working to make our market, our economy, a real, what it should be, a dynamic thing that's creating jobs. Jobs are lost, jobs are created. But if people buy into the notion of change, then they can be assured that if they retrain themselves in accordance with the new demands of the marketplace, they can find new work.
Yeah. Well, the one thing about it, serving 20 years in the military myself, I do understand how powerful our military is, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm 100% committed to believing that if we wanted to take out bin Laden in a week, we could have, right? Mm-hmm. I also feel like if we wanted to stop the drugs from trafficking across our borders, we could stop it. And it feels like, and I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but like you just said, if it costs, me $20 million to run for office and I know I'm coming up, do I really care where that money came from? Because I need it to stay in the office. And so you can't tell me that there's not something behind the scenes that's preventing us from shutting down the drug trade. Because I honestly believe that's a lot of where the mental health issues are in the United States is the drugs that we are getting and using are not healthy. The majority of the foods that we're given to eat are not healthy. And all of this stuff creates, just like you said, the plastic that people ingest every day from eating. It's been known to affect the brains.
Well, I can tell you a little story from down here in Peru. I actually have a good friend who works in Peruvian customs, and they find fentanyl coming from China, but it's not for Peru. It's to be sent on to the U.S. Yeah. So why is this so appealing for China? Well, they not only get money from this, they are destroying the minds of our youth. Yeah. And so, the thing about the drug war that was started by President Nixon is that he was a smart guy, and he had to have known that a war on drugs would be about as successful as prohibition was. In other words, you're not going to get people to stop drinking. You're just going to make it the business of the gangsters and the criminals. Well, he had to have known that something similar would happen with the drug war, because you're not going to get people to stop taking drugs. All you're going to do is make it the business of the drug cartels, the gangsters, the criminals, which is what we have. And then you get this perverse, because these cartels have so much money, because we're basically millions of people are destroying their brain in our country and sending money to the cartels to do it. It just doesn't make any sense. And these cartels, with all this money, they control the politicians, they control the police, they control the armed forces, they control the judges. They have control of everything. And this is one of the reasons why we have such a big refugee immigration problem, because people are fleeing these dysfunctional, violent societies where the cartels call the shots from A to Z. And as long as the money is so astoundingly big, in the drug industry, we're just not gonna, from my point of view, the only way to win the drug war is to destroy the economics. If you destroy the economics, you win the drug war. And so, if you can't make money, if a pusher can't make money selling drugs to other kids in high school, which is where most people get started, by the way, before they're 18. These drug pushers, they look for the most vulnerable kids, they look for the most vulnerable girls, they befriend them, and then they get them to experiment this stuff. It's extremely addictive. But if they're not going to make any money off of it, then the business, there's no business. And then, so that's what I tried to propose on the website. The way to win the drug war is to destroy the economics. And, once there's no money to be made in it, then we're not going to be sending all this money to these cartels and all the terrible problems that causes.
Right. The other problem with it too is since we're talking about cartels, we'll talk about Mexico and Southern America. The governments are powerless against those guys, right? I'm not talking about the U.S.
Oh, yes.
It's their local governments. They don't want to be killed, and they know that the cartels have the power to have them assassinated at any time if they wanted to. So they just turn a blind eye. But I think, if there was a little bit of peer pressure put on them, say if any drug comes across your border, you're not getting any foreign aid from us this year. And I think that would help by them starting to police up their own areas. That would help us as far as get a grasp on it. Yes, you are 100% correct. We've got a problem. Not every drug comes across the border. There's a lot of drugs, especially meth and stuff, that is made and manufactured here in America.
Oh, yes, exactly. Yeah, but why is it made? Why is it made? Is because people make money off of it, and so and a lot of money. And the thing is the best business to be in is the one where your customers are addicted to your product, because then you've got guaranteed recurring revenue. And so they make these drugs that they've got the ability to do the research to make these drugs extremely addictive, like from the get go. And then once they got you hooked, they've got you for life. And you're going to do whatever you have to get your fix. And so, I proposed, ways to destroy the economics, and it's a pretty radical proposal, but it's basically let's just make them available free of charge. These drugs. I know that sounds incredibly bold, but if you make them, you have to combine that with education and with treatment. If you educate kids from an early age about the dangers of drugs, and the fact that they're not illegal takes away that allure, because I know that I experimented with stuff because it was the cool thing to do. When you're a young teenager, you want to be rebellious, you want to flip your nose at authority. Well, that was part of the allure of it. And so you educate kids about the dangers of addictions, starting with illegal drugs. You start from an early age. You make it so that there's no money to be made in illicit drugs, and they won't be illicit anymore. And then you combine that with treatment. And I believe that if you give people the education and you take away the economics and you have in place a robust treatment system, that would be far more effective than what we have now. Because all of this, we've spent well over $1 trillion on this drug war, and we've made no progress. In fact, it's worse. It is worse. Every time I go back to the U.S., it seems the problem is ever worse. And why is it ever worse? And why won't we ever solve it? It will never solve it as long as there's so much money to be made in it. And so that's my bold proposal. After talking to different people, the only way to destroy win the drug war is to destroy the economics.
So would you say that? So Oregon did something. Oregon or Washington, I can't remember which it was. They did something similar, but they didn't kill the economic side of it. They just decriminalized.
Yes. That's the thing. You can't do this half-ass. You've got to go in full turkey. You've got to go in where you destroy the economics, where you educate and you provide treatment. It's got to be a complete thing. And you've got to understand. I think, there's some people who they only live to take their drugs. Okay. Right. For those individuals, okay, we're going to give them small, humble place to stay outside of the city. We'll give them their drugs. We'll give them access to treatment should they choose to get out of that cycle. But, okay, that's going to be an investment. It's going to be an investment. But when you think about what you would get back, for one thing, businesses would come back to the downtown Portland area, for example. Tourism would come back. People would start to live downtown again. You're going to get, my theory is you're going to get far more payback by for these individuals. You house them in special places. You just give them their drugs if that's all they want. It's better than having them out in the street robbing or doing whatever to get money to get their drugs. I mean, they're going to get their drugs one way or the other, rather than engaging in young women getting pregnant so they can buy their drugs, which is the worst thing possible. You just give the young lady drugs, you give her birth control, and then you give her access to treatment. But if they want to continue to just live, only to live to take drugs, that's just the way it is. But at least they're safe. At least they know, or we know too, that they're getting drugs that have been manufactured and not laced with who knows what.
Yeah.
And that investment, that's going to cost some money, but I believe that the economics would more than justify it, because you're going to get the cities, and that's not just big cities, by the way. You go to my sister lives in small rural town in Utah. This drug problem.
It's everywhere.
In fact, I have a good friend who comes from a very small town in Missouri, and he said he lives there. There are only 3 things to do in that town: fight, fentanyl, and then I won't say the other F word. But so this is not just a big city problem. This is a nationwide problem, and especially in the smaller cities, they don't have the resources to fight back. Yeah. So you take the economics out, no money can be made. You educate people, and smoking has dropped so much because we've educated people. People, at least half the country used to smoke. Now it's at least under a quarter. Why? Because people have been educated. You educate them about the horrors of these sorts of addictive substances. You give them access to treatment, but you take the economics out. So that's the basic idea. Now, these are controversial ideas. That's okay. Let's have the discussion. Let's have the ideas exchanged, but let's come up with something much better than what we have now, because what we have now is not working. Yeah. All we're doing is sending oodles of money to the drug cartels, which control the countries everywhere south of the border, which is one reason why we have this terrible crisis. And by the way, if these countries, they didn't have this, they would be great for tourism. They would have their own local hub. They'd be great for places to retire. They could have their own local industries. Like right now, the Mexican cartels are taking over the avocado industry. That wouldn't happen if we got rid of the drug cartels. So that's a long-winded thing, and I know it's a bold idea, but let's get the ideas out there and let's move things forward.
I do agree partially with what you said here, because you are right. The only way you're going to get rid of the cartels from funding drugs is when it doesn't become cost effective to do it anymore. And
yes, exactly.
The other side of that is I don't know about making it accessible for anybody to do for free. There has to be another way to eliminate the economy side of it and still provide help for getting the people off the drugs. I get, if you're a heroin user, they're going to need another drug to wean you off of heroin,
Right.
and stuff like that. I'm not saying not do that. I'm just saying there has to be a way to protect our youth at the same time, because they're our future.
I totally get. Yeah.
I've seen what meth does to kids off of just using it, experimenting. It changes your whole thought process and your decision-making skills are just changed for the rest of your life.
Changes your brain.
Yeah, completely. And, it's one of those things about, when it becomes accessible, how many people are going to allow curiosity to cause them to make changes in their brain that they're not aware of. Like you said, education is going to take that ability.
Well, that's the thing, is that's one of the reasons why I propose we have every year, 1 day where the school has what's called an addiction awareness day, starting from kindergarten. And on that day, it's dedicated exclusively to talking about addictions. It talks about all the things you can get addicted to. What are the telltale signs of an addiction? What happens if you get addicted to gambling? Well, let's bring in people who are struggling with these addictions, who have conquered these addictions. Let's bring in medical experts who can talk to the kids according to their level about what happens to the brain. And so you make people aware, or you make kids aware from a very early age of what, the telltale signs and the dangers of addictions. And we're talking addictions all across the spectrum. I'd like to have an analysis of how much of our economy depends on addictions, whether we're talking addictions to junk food, to alcohol, to tobacco, to gambling, to pornography. There's so many things, and how much of our economy is actually, or even legal meds. That's why you have 7 out of every 10 commercials on TV these days is a med commercial.
Yep.
Let's educate kids from an early age about the facts of addiction, how to avoid addictions, the ramifications of getting addicted to something. And then, you want to experiment? Okay, we're going to let you experiment, but nobody's going to make any money off of it. So you're not going to have pushers.
Yeah.
You're not going to have these Amway-like salespeople in your school pushing these drugs because they can make a lot of money doing it. There's no money to be made. And if you do decide to experiment, understand what you're getting yourself into. And if you do get hooked, we'll always have, treatment options available. But if you take away the sales aspect, the people who go in there proactively looking for customers, going after our most vulnerable kids, the lonely kids, the insecure kids, and getting, quote unquote, befriending them to get them hooked.
Yep.
You see, I think that's the combination that we need. We can't do this in a sort of half-ass way like they did in Oregon. We've got to go a comprehensive approach that destroys the economics, that educates people from a young age, and provides treatment and a safe place to be that, if they do get hopelessly addicted.
Yeah. I mean, you are 100%. I agree 100% with those last two things that you just said. The fact that you have to take away the economy part of it. And you have to start talking to children early, because if you think that the drug dealers are not talking to your 10-year-olds, your 11-year-olds, you're wrong. Right. I mean, they're hitting them as young as they can come up with money.
Oh, yes, exactly. But not only that, let's look at what's happening with sports gambling. How many young men now are getting hooked to that? And the thing about, one of the things you would teach with this addiction awareness day is that when it comes to gambling, you are mathematically guaranteed to lose. Okay.
Right.
Let's make no bones about that. You might get lucky and win a little bit, temporarily, but over the long term, you are statistically, mathematically guaranteed to lose. And not only that, they put in, it's a very psychological, they've done a lot of psychological research to keep people, in the gambling mindset. And one of the ways is if you if you're at a casino and you lose 6 times, but you win 4 times, you still lose money, but you're going to win, or you're going to remember those 4 times that you won. Yep. You're going to concentrate on that. And so it's a science that's meant to get you addicted, and you're going to lose. And if you understand that before you start your sports gambling, then you can dabble in it, have a little fun, but keep it under control. You know, I like to go to Las Vegas occasionally, have a little fun with the slot machines, but I always put a limit, $20.
Yep.
After $20, I don't go any farther because I don't want to start saying, oh, well, maybe $10 more. Well, shoot, I've already spent 30. Why not another 10 and another 10? You know?
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. I love playing poker, and whenever I'd go to a poker game, I leave my debit card at the house. I take my driver's license, and I take the cash that I want to play with. And when it's gone, it's gone, you know?
Exactly.
But I understand you have to have those kind of control measures because it is you're very easily to get addicted. That feeling of a winning, you know, the endorphins that go off, the dopamine that goes off, you're going to crave that way more than the losses.
Well, yeah. And then like here in Peru, they've got casinos galore. And, you know, it's really sad because, you know, some of these people don't have a lot of money. They go in, they spend the education money for their kids, the rent money. And then these casinos, they have free alcohol. You get the alcohol flowing, break down the emissions. They've got these pretty young women who go around encouraging them. Oh, yes, keep going. Your luck's going to change. And you know, it's all a terrible racket because, you know, that really affects children. That affects families. And so the key is, you know, we can't make gambling illegal because it won't go away. It'll just become the business of criminals. But we can educate people about the telltale signs of gambling or addiction. And number 2, about the facts of gambling, for example. Yeah. And again, this all comes back to the addiction day. You know, let's also teach about addiction to junk food. You know, if you buy a bag of chips, how long does it last? It doesn't last 20 minutes in my house. You know, that's why I don't buy it, because I know once I get that bag of chips in the house, it's gone. Yeah. And so they make that stuff addictive, or social media, or you name it.
Yeah.
You know, there's so much money to be made on addictions, and we've got to educate our kids to be aware that, you know, that's the most appealing business model, and people are going to try to get you into that addictive state because it can make a lot of money off of you. And so that whether we're talking about drugs, whether we're talking about all these other things that we can get addicted to, make addictions aware, have our kids have a real awareness of addictions from an early age, so that, you know, if they do choose to get addicted to something, they will do so from a standpoint of knowledge, not because they started gambling, not understanding the dangers.
Right. And again, these items that we're talking about that are legalized, you know, all the states that have legalized marijuana, look at the tax rate on these things. Our government's making money off of it too. You know, the tax rates are increased for alcohol, cigarettes, anything that is addictive or a vice that people are going to want. You're going to pay a high toll for it, you know?
Right. Yes.
And again, where's the money really being made at? It's being made through everybody. Everybody's getting a piece of this that isn't, it's not in their best interest to get rid of it, you know?
But, given all the economic challenges, I mean, you know, having an addiction is a terrible waste, a terrible loss of money, because you're I mean, like if you even have an addiction to, say, a latte every morning, you know, let's just say a simple example. Okay, a $5 latte, you know, that's almost $2,000 a year. Yeah. You know, just on a simple latte. And and so if you have a recurring expense like that, that's from an addiction, that's really devastating over the long term for your financial health, unless you have inherited hundreds of millions of dollars, but most of us haven't. And so, you know, the key is you know, making people aware from a very early age about the addictions, and then destroying the economics for the illicit. You know, when we start making things illegal, you know, all it does, like I say, it just makes the business of criminals.
Yeah, you're right.
And you know, so this whole drug war is, you know, it's just been mind-boggling, wasteful failure. All that money, and look at the results. I see the results are terrible. Just awful. In fact, I've never seen it anywhere around the world, anywhere worse than in our country.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you 100%. It is no secret. Why is it that if you look at the stats, right, mental health and addictions run side by side with each other?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. It's not uncommon that you say, oh, that person's addicted to blah. Oh, he also has a mental issue with PTSD or something else, depression, something, right? And so, it is a huge problem, and it's because we've allowed it to be a huge problem.
Like I said,
go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the fentanyl that coming from China and from other places. This stuff, is not only incredibly deadly, incredibly addictive, but it actually is shown that it causes mental illness very easily. Yeah. And boy, I can tell you, walking around the streets of Portland, it's like somebody opened the doors to the insane asylum and said, "Clear out." I mean, it's just craziness.
Yeah,
it's insanity.
Yeah, I agree. I seen it, and it has always bothered me. Right, when America decided, when the states decided, okay, you know what, we're making marijuana legal, right? Mm-hmm. And the government didn't do that across the board. They didn't say, okay, every state, it's now legal federally, right?
Right.
It was one state here, one state there. Well, when that process first started, and I seen it, as I owned a trucking company, so I was all over the United States, and you would see what the cost of housing became, and how lucrative. You think people were making money off of drugs. Hotels were renting parking spots for RVs at like $26 a day, making more money for somebody sleeping in an RV in their parking lot than they were making off of their rooms. And, this was in Oregon as well, not Portland, but the place that I would stop at for the weekend, it was a hotel. There was RVs there that had been there for so long, they had built decks off the side of them.
Wow.
And you think about that, $26 a day. I talked to the owner about this because it baffled me. But then again, the wages never went up. Mechanics, they were still working for $15, $16 an hour, but a one bedroom studio was $1,500 a month.
Right.
If you could find one.
Right. Oh, I know.
So
I absolutely know. I mean, the thing is it's the housing issue and the rent. It's another extremely serious problem in our country because people just simply can't afford rents anymore. And,
but that happened because we were allowing drugs to be legalized in one area and not another, and it made people flock to it. I would have never thought that marijuana was strong enough to make somebody uproot their whole family to go move to a state where they could legally smoke, but it did, and I seen it everywhere. Homeless people all over the place because they're just not so much that they couldn't work, they just couldn't find a place to live. There wasn't physically enough houses for all the people that had moved there. Right. It is crazy.
Yeah, and like I say, the problem is that this is the sort of thing, and I know I'm repeating myself, we can't just do half-ass. You got to go in whole turkey, or it's not going to work. And so, just legalizing one drug here in this state, you're going to create all sorts of
ripple effects,
weird problems. Yes, that don't really solve the problem at all. In fact, just make certain things worse, a lot worse.
And again, we didn't do anything but encourage it anyways, because we didn't get rid of the economic side of it. They were still selling it. So people were still, encouraged to push it and everything else, even though it had been legalized. I live in Missouri as well. He was talking about Missouri, and I live in Rolla, and I can relate exactly to what your friend said. There isn't much to do around here. It's a small college town, and we've got our share of meth and homelessness, and and everything else in this tiny little town as well. And so it's unfortunate. And we've allowed the problem to get so big that you'll have to get a really big shovel to dig ourselves out of it. That's for sure.
Yeah. But the thing is that what I really believe in is if we have an open discussion of ideas and we get the best ideas out there. See, the thing about a democracy is I believe very firmly that if your ideas are really the best ones and they're presented in a clear and honest way, and the other ideas are presented in a clear and honest way, that the American people will make the right decision. We will come up with solutions. The problem is when you get this misrepresentation. People aren't being, our politicians don't have any ideas, or if somebody does have an idea, they get misrepresented, they get, demonized. Let's get all that crap out of it, and let's talk about the ideas. Let's exchange the ideas and come up with solutions. It's really that simple. I lived in China. Mm-hmm. And I even have sometime when maybe if I'm in your neck of the woods, I'll get together, talk to you a little bit about my North Korean experience, which is something, I'll enjoy telling you about. But the thing is what we should be able to kick their fannies, kick their asses, because we have a system that allows a competition of ideas. Those countries, only one idea is allowed, only one opinion. A Chinese person once told me that the greatest thing about living in America is the freedom of thought. Yeah. And when you have a nation of free, independent, and responsible thinkers and creative thinkers and open-minded thinkers, you're going to be far, far better than a country that only allows one point of view, that only allows one opinion. And so our greatest strength is the diversity of our ideas. Let's get the emotions out of the picture, and let's just talk about the ideas. Any idea is open. Sometimes a very bad idea is the inspiration for a very great idea. There are no bad ideas here. Let's get them out. Let's listen to everybody's, different points of view in an open-minded and respectful way, and let's move forward.
Well, let me ask you this. Why, my thoughts has always been that we say that we elect our officials to be our voice, right? But who could say for me what I want and say it the way I want, right? Why can't I just have a voice? And what I'm getting at is I think a couple things need to change rapidly to be able to start evolving some of these other changes. And one of them is the ability to hide things in other bills. Okay, I'm going to give you what you want, but then I'm going to hide all this other stuff behind it that that we want, but we don't want you to say no to. Well, if we had a way that everything was viewed, live, right? Our congressmen and our senators created these ideas and proposals from their constituents, but when it came time to approve the bill, everybody voted on it.
Right.
We didn't just decide we're going to give $200 billion to the Taliban. We proposed that people can watch it live and listen to the debates back and forth, and then they can vote on it. And whatever the general census from the public is what the government does. They work for us.
Exactly. That's the point. They should be working for us. But as the Tennessee Representative Tim Burchett said, everything that happens in Washington is about keeping the powerful in power. Yeah. And that's what it all comes down to.
You're right.
These are people whose only priority is staying in power. And, and this is the problem with the political parties too. Their only priority is getting more power for themselves. Yeah. This is why I propose let's disband political parties after 12 years so we get the tribalism out of the way. So you don't have these long-term vested interests in keeping, the political parties in power. And so, all these hidden bills that you're talking about, this is all about helping them stay in power or helping the special interests that help keep them in power. This is what all this charade crap is about. Yeah. It's all about the power. It's like Bill Clinton said when he was running for president, it's the economy is stupid. Well, when you ask what's the problem, With our country, well, it's the power, stupid. It's these people whose priority is staying in power and will do anything, say anything to keep it. And so the only cure is, okay, there is no political career here. You're not going to have a political career. You have one chance to make your mark on history. What are you going to do with it? Are you going to do it for self-serving purposes, or are you going to go down in history as somebody who really worked for your constituents, really cared, and really did what you could to move things forward and make things better? It wasn't a bunch of political talk where you're making it sound like you're working for them, but in reality, you're really working for the special interests that help keep you where you are. Because that's, from my point of view, what we have now. All this hidden charade crap, it's all about the power.
Oh yeah, anybody that wants to argue and say, well, our system works, it's worked for years. My question to them is why is the government shut down every year?
Yeah,
why?
I don't think
it works. The government's about to shut down again because we're allowing the minority to have to agree with each other that is not, because there's lines drawn between parties that I agree with you 100% should go away. Even George Washington would agree with you that it should go away because he didn't like parties.
Exactly. He warned against political parties. This is one of the things I wrote in the blog. He warned against political parties because what happens with political parties, just like with any other organization, they become institutionalized where the interests of the organization become the priority, not what the organization was originally set up to do. And let's take an extreme example, like the Communist Party. Which I have some familiarity with, having lived in China. That was set up to empower workers. But what did it become? It became a cult-like club that empowered and greatly enriched the party bosses. And it became anything but something to help the average person. The average person in China is now, they have to watch their conversations are monitored 24/7. They're analyzed by AI 24/7. Yep. And this is all about them keeping their power. All this like the Taliban or the Ayatollahs or the communists. This is not about religion. It's not about communism. It's all about power. And so power, as I say, is the most addictive thing of all. And this is another thing we should teach on Addiction Day. Political power is addictive. And that's why we have to vote for people who promise to only serve one term until we can actually codify it, put it in writing. But in the meantime, we don't need to codify it. Just vote for people who say, I'm going to be there one term. I'm going to be working 100% for you. I don't have there's no reason for me to be in bed with a special interest because I'm not running for office. Yep. I promise, by the way, not to go to work for some, big special interest after my job. And that's what we need to do, is to address the addiction to power, which is makes our political parties so tribal, makes our politicians so obsessed with staying in office, and is really one of the reasons why our democracy is not working now. I really believe that the problems of our country are very serious. The middle class is shrinking. The middle class is shrinking. The upper 0.1% owns like 50% of all the wealth. We want the rich to get richer, but we want the middle class's percentage of the overall wealth to grow faster than the upper 0.1% percentage of the overall wealth. That's the true success of an economy, of a successful economy. Yeah. And we don't have that now. But we can have it if we let our markets work without politicians giving favor to special interests. If we invest in our people so they can be creative and adaptive to the new market conditions. And we have an economy based, what I say, on unlimited energy. Because if you have unlimited energy, because energy is everywhere and we can tap into unlimited energy. And once you have unlimited energy, you have the ability to do unlimited work. The physics definition of energy is the ability to work. So we can desalinate the water, get rid of droughts once and for all. We could set up cities in remote areas that are impractical now because we have all this water. We can cheaply send from the oceans to these big cities, bringing down rents. All sorts of miracle things we could do if we unleash our all of the energy that's really available to us.
I was just sitting here thinking as you was talking about, I just wonder, it just makes me wonder, what if everybody had a veto button on their desk, right?
Uh-huh.
And so the president, we'll use the president or the congressman, right? They can run exact same thing. Everything stays the same, exactly how it is, except every year, the people can decide whether you did good enough to go to the next year. You don't necessarily always get 4 years. You year one, and at the end, you don't rerun, but there's a date that everybody hits that button and they can either say yay or nay on whether you get to work another year.
Well, that's a great idea.
How much it would change. I wonder how much it would change if their focus would be like, look, I better fix the things I said I was going to fix, or I'm getting the nay button.
Hold their feet to the fire. Well, I also think, by the way, another thing I propose is let's hold candidates and elected officials accountable for lying. The thing is, if you hire me if you're interviewing me for a job, now it's my free speech to lie during the interview. I can lie during the interview, but you have every right to kick me out of the interview if you catch me lying. Well, by the same token, why are we allowing our candidates to lie with such reckless abandon? If you are caught brazenly lying, we'll give you a warning. But if you continue to lie, you're disqualified, because we need to have our politicians being honest with us. If we don't have our politicians honest with us, then our electorate can't make wise decisions. And the same thing with our politicians. If they are caught lying and lying and lying, just like if you're caught lying during a job, on the job, your employer has every right to kick you out or to fire you. Well, the same thing. We've got, truth in politics has to be considered an absolute non-negotiable.
Yeah, absolute
non-negotiable. And we can have a whole, our robust journalism, which I try to propose ideas, is will help keep those politicians, our elected officials who are only going to serve one term, help keep their feet to the fire about. When it comes to truthful matters, not saying wild lies like what we hear now all the time.
Well, and you think about it, right? We'll take the real simple thing. So many presidents, to include Trump and everybody, have been charged with crimes. They went through a court hearing, and we spent, I don't know, $1 gazillion in all these legal actions. Mm-hmm. So that at the end, it just goes away and nothing happened, right? Nobody went to jail. Nobody on both sides. You take Hillary Clinton, you take Bill Clinton, you take Trump, you take all these people have all been charged with crimes and just nothing happens. But yet, how many people talk about Hillary and Trump with all this sensitive item stuff, right? The classified documents.
I know email server and all that stuff. Yeah,
all that stuff. And nothing happened about it. But I know for a fact there was a seaman on a submarine whose mom asked him to send a picture of him where he worked. So he took a selfie. Mm-hmm. That selfie got found and he went to jail for showing classified information.
Right. Wow.
I mean, it's a huge problem with, like you said, we've allowed the powerful become so powerful that it's not in our best interest to put them in jail.
Well, yeah. And, it's just like with President Clinton and that whole Monica Lewinsky thing. They get to this, power goes to people's head. And they think they can start, it's like the rich kid, the rich teenager who just, has never known anything but wealth, and they just think they can act the way they want. And, the power has sort of a similar effect. And they start thinking they can just, they can pay lip service to the rules, but they can, kind of just do what they want. The rules don't apply to them.
Yeah.
And, that's not right. Rules have to apply. The law has to apply to everybody without exception. And, whether we're talking Hillary Clinton, whether we're talking Trump, or whether we're talking about so many of our other politicians.
Yeah.
But again, as long as they get addicted to power and re-election becomes their priority, and the political parties, expanding their power is their first priority, not the good of the country. Expanding their power is the first priority. We can't really expect things to get better.
Yeah. No, I agree with you 100%. And just for the record, I don't know that Hillary would drive me to cheat, but might drive me to a battered man's shelter. That's for sure. Oh man. But Evan, this has been a great conversation. I love having conversations in it, and it is awesome when people can come together, share ideas, not necessarily have to agree on everything, but when it's over with, still be considered good friends and
exactly,
and great people, because that is exactly how great things happen. It's from these kind of conversations that people have. And usually what comes to mind is it comes to the middle somewhere, and there's a little bit of give and take, and
right.
Great things are built off that.
Yeah. In fact, I have an article called the True Source of American Greatness. And the true source of our greatness is the civility and the respect with which we treat each other. Yeah. That's what makes a great country. And let me just give you 1 minute to tell you a very brief story about me in college. I went to a very small liberal arts college. It was liberal in every sense. And I was a young Republican. I was anti-Soviet and pro-capitalist. And I got into a lot of emotionally charged discussions with my fellow students who were very liberal. But I can tell you this, after all the heated arguing, after all the intense debating, after all the points and counterpoints we made, we could go and have dinner together, go have lunch together, go get coffee together, go study together. Because even though we had different ideas, we all knew that everybody else had the best interests at heart. We just had different ideas, and we learned from each other's ideas. Yep. And that's what I think we need more of in this country, not the demonization, not the rancor and the anger, yep. Which, by the way, benefits our politicians. They love having this division because they have whole groups of automatic voters. Yeah. Our presidential elections have come down to a few purple counties and a few purple states, whereas they should be fighting for every vote in every town, in every county in the country. But instead, it's 3 counties outside of Milwaukee, 3 counties outside of Philadelphia, 3 counties outside of Atlanta, matter more than all of the rest of the country, which is just insanity. But the politicians love it because they've got all of, the Kamala could count on California and New York. Trump could count on Florida and Texas. And they shouldn't be that way.
And that is something that, you're correct. We are at a pivoting point, and you see it because it doesn't really get a lot of news. But when you start hearing that they want to change the way electoral votes are being done, I promise you, the people that want that change are not changing it to make it fair. They're changing it for their best interest. If I'm a Republican and I want to divide this up, it's because I want to make sure that I'm getting more votes on my side. And
exactly,
Trump has fell into that same category.
That's the only thing that drives them. And this is what happens when people let their addictions. This is why addictions make you dumb, because the addiction becomes the priority. If you've ever known somebody with an out of control addiction, it completely changes them. And it frankly makes you dumber because the addiction becomes your priority in life.
Yep. Well, Evan, I'm going to bring you forward, man, and let you tell everybody where they can follow you. I will also make sure that your website and everything gets posted at the bottom on the video and into the notes for people to click on. And I'll give you that opportunity to tell everybody where they can find you.
Okay. First of all, it's solutionsparty.org, just exactly how it's spelled, solutionsparty.org. And then I do post daily to X_solutionsparty. I won't deny that I'm a little irreverent with politicians on X, but it's all in good humor. And I don't get offended. I don't insult. And, I would love to have your feedback. And you can reach me through the website at info@solutionsparty.com. And I want to emphasize that, all ideas are welcome. This is not about me. Politics should never be about a person. It should always be about ideas. Welcome all ideas across the political spectrum, and let's have a positive discussion and make this country what it should be, the majestic country that it should be, and it will be.
All right. Yeah, I agree 100%. And for the people out there listening to this, I think at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with disagreements. That's how great things come about is the debate back and forth. It's one of the reasons why we teach debate in schools.
Right.
Because it is the way to get to the right solution when you hear the arguments back and forth.
Well, the thing is that people have always disagreed. They will always disagree.
Yeah.
The key is how do you handle those disagreements? Do we going to sharpen the swords and sharpen the spears and go at it? Or are we going to talk about these ideas like civil adults and open-minded and come up with the best ideas?
Yep, I agree. So I hope all of y'all enjoyed this show, got a little bit out of it, and make sure you go check out his website. I did. It is got some amazing ideas, and it will really get you to thinking of things that can be done to improve and what's better for the greater good. So y'all take care, be safe. Don't forget, don't let the day kick your ass. Kick the day's ass.